The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council sparkled with 1,000 floating lights, each one representing a member civilization. The marble-like floor reflected the glow of distant stars visible through the transparent ceiling. At the center of this magnificent chamber stood two humans in simple blue uniforms, their backs straight and faces calm despite the tension in the air. Admiral James and Ambassador Thomas represented the best of humanity. They had spent 3 years preparing Earth's application for membership in the Galactic Council. Their presentation had been perfect, showing Earth's technological progress, cultural achievements, and peaceful unification under a single government. But Lord Bright, the High Speaker of the Council, hadn't even bothered to sit down during their presentation. The tall, silver-skinned alien stood at his podium, his 4 eyes blinking in an irregular pattern that the humans had learned meant amusement. Not the good kind. "The Council has reviewed Earth's application," Lord Bright announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It is, quite frankly, the most entertaining submission we have received in the past century." Laughter rippled through the chamber. The floating lights pulsed with different colors as various council members joined in the mockery. Admiral James felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his face neutral. Ambassador Thomas maintained her diplomatic smile, though her hands clasped tightly behind her back. "Your species," Lord Bright continued, "has barely mastered basic space travel. Your fastest ships crawl through space like insects. Your weapons are crude projectiles and chemical explosives. And you think you deserve a place among the stars." More laughter. A holographic display appeared above the chamber, showing Earth's latest battleship. The council members pointed at its nuclear engines and railguns, chuckling at what they saw as primitive technology. "But what truly amuses us," Lord Bright's voice cut through the laughter, "is your species' history of violence. You fight wars over resources that any civilized race could synthesize. You kill each other over invisible lines drawn on your planet's surface. You elect leaders through popularity contests rather than measuring their cognitive capacity." Ambassador Thomas stepped forward. "High Speaker, if I may." "You may not," Lord Bright cut her off. "The Council has made its decision. Not only is Earth's application for membership denied, but we are declaring your solar system a quarantine zone." The chamber fell silent. This was more than a rejection. It was an imprisonment. "No Earth ship will be permitted to travel beyond your solar system's boundary," Lord Bright declared. "No council member will be permitted to trade with your world. This quarantine will remain in effect until your species evolves beyond its primitive and violent nature, which our experts estimate will take approximately 50,000 years." Admiral James felt something snap inside him. Not in anger, but in cold, calculating determination. He watched as Lord Bright's assistants approached with data tablets, officially recording Earth's new status as a quarantine civilization. "The Council thanks you for your entertaining presentation," Lord Bright said, his 4 eyes now fixed on a data string floating beside him, already moving on to other matters. "You are dismissed. Please ensure your departure from Council space follows the quarantine protocols." As they turned to leave, Admiral James caught snippets of conversation from various council members. "Can you believe they still use chemical fuel? I heard they haven't even mastered genetic engineering. My research indicates they sleep away 1/3 of their lives. How inefficient." The walk back to their ship was long and quiet. Only when they were safely aboard and breaking orbit from the council station did Ambassador Thomas break the silence. "They'll regret this," she said quietly. Admiral James nodded, watching the magnificent council station shrink in their view screen. "Yes, they will. But not because we'll prove them wrong about our technology. Oh, we'll prove them right about our capacity for violence." The Admiral's lips curved in a slight smile. "They think we're primitive. Fine. Let's show them just how dangerous primitive humans can be." As their ship accelerated toward Earth, carrying news of their rejection and quarantine, neither the Admiral nor the Ambassador felt defeated. Instead, they felt something much more dangerous. They felt inspired. The Council had just made the biggest mistake in its long history. They hadn't just insulted humanity, they had challenged it. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was rising to a challenge. The revenge would be slow, methodical, and absolutely shocking to their arrogant observers. After all, what could be more terrifying than watching primitives systematically dismantle an empire? 5 years had passed since the Council's rejection. From the outside, Earth appeared to have accepted its fate. The quarantine beacons blinked silently at the edge of the solar system, monitoring all space traffic. Council observers reported that humans had turned their focus inward, apparently working on their primitive problems. They couldn't have been more wrong. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, in a facility known simply as the Forge, thousands of Earth's brightest minds worked tirelessly. The massive underground complex stretched for miles, its halls filled with laboratories, testing chambers, and workshop spaces that would have made the Council's scientists gasp in shock. Dr. Miller stood at the main observation deck, watching as another test of the hybrid drive system began. Below, a prototype engine combined Earth's primitive nuclear pulse drive with salvaged alien technology. The Council would have called it impossible. Their own engineers had declared that mixing technologies was dangerous and crude. The engine roared to life, its core glowing with an impossible combination of human and alien energy signatures. Test number 847 is successful, announced the AI assistant. Unlike the Council's pure quantum AIs, Earth had created a hybrid system that combined traditional computing with quantum processes. Another impossible achievement. Record all readings, Dr. Miller said, allowing himself a small smile. How long until the Council's monitoring systems would detect this energy signature? They won't, the AI replied. The hybrid configuration masks itself as background radiation. To their sensors, this facility appears to be a simple mining operation. In another section of the Forge, General Rivers watched as soldiers trained with the new combat systems. The powered armor suits looked crude by Council standards, all sharp angles and visible joints, but appearances were deceiving. Each suit combined Earth's rugged, practical design with reverse-engineered alien shield technology. Team Alpha, begin the infiltration test, she ordered. The soldiers moved through the training course with incredible speed. Their primitive projectile weapons had been modified with alien power systems, allowing them to punch through Council shield technology as if it were paper. The Council relied too heavily on energy shields, never expecting anyone to use physical ammunition anymore. Meanwhile, in orbit around Jupiter, Earth's new fleet took shape. The ships looked ugly by Council standards, blocky, armored vessels that resembled naval battleships more than sleek space cruisers. Admiral James stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as another vessel completed its metamorphosis. "Status report," he commanded. "Hull plating is at 100%. His executive officer reported. "Hybrid systems are operating within parameters. Council sensors still read us as a gas mining operation." The Admiral nodded. The Council's arrogance had given Earth its greatest advantage. They weren't even looking for threats. Their automated quarantine systems were designed to detect known technologies, not the impossible combinations Earth had created. In the diplomatic quarter of New Geneva, Ambassador Thomas hosted another secret meeting. Representatives from other primitive races sat around the table, species that the Council had rejected or overlooked. Their ships had slipped through the quarantine by appearing as space debris, using Earth's new stealth systems. "The trading network is established," a delegate from a silicon-based species reported. "The Council remains unaware that we're bypassing their economic sanctions." "And our combined research efforts?" Thomas asked. "Proceeding faster than expected. It turns out when you combine technologies in ways the Council forbids, you get remarkable results." The pieces were falling into place. While the Council watched for signs of rebellion or military buildup, Earth had spent 5 years becoming something entirely new. Not primitive, not advanced, but something in between, something unpredictable. In his private office in the Forge, Admiral James reviewed the latest readiness reports. Everything was almost ready. Soon, the Council would learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their violence. It was their creativity, their ability to combine ideas in ways the advanced races would never consider. "Send the signal," he ordered. "Project Silent Storm begins in 72 hours. Across the solar system, humans smiled as they received the coded message. 5 years of patience, of appearing to accept their humiliation, were about to pay off. The Council had no idea what was coming. They expected rebellion. They expected violence. They expected primitive humans to react in primitive ways. They weren't expecting an enemy that had turned their own arrogance into a weapon. Lord Bright stood at his usual place in the Council chamber, addressing the daily concerns of the galaxy's civilized species. Today's topic was a trade dispute between two ancient races over the rights to a newly discovered fuel source. Then everything went dark. The floating lights flickered and died. The holographic displays vanished. Even the artificial gravity stuttered for a moment. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing the chamber in a dull red glow. "Status report," Lord Bright demanded. "High speaker," a technician called out, panic in his voice. "The jump gates, they're all shutting down." Across the galaxy, every FTL transportation hub in Council space went dark simultaneously. Thousands of ships found themselves stranded mid-route, forced to drop back to normal space. The Council's carefully organized trade network, the source of their power and wealth, had just collapsed. In the Council's central command center, alarms blared as reports flooded in. The master display showed red dots spreading across the galaxy map like a virus, marking each disabled jump gate. "Impossible," the chief engineer muttered, his 3 hands flying over control panels. "The system has redundancies, triple failsafes. This can't happen." But it was happening, and that's when the message arrived. Every screen in Council space lit up with the same image, Earth's simple blue and white flag. A human voice, calm and clear, began to speak. "Greetings, Galactic Council. Admiral James of Earth speaking. 5 years ago, you called us primitive. You locked us away like children. Today, we demonstrate why that was a mistake." In the Council chamber, Lord Bright's 4 eyes widened as Admiral James continued. "While you watched our primitive weapons and crude ships, we studied your jump gate network. Did you know that your advanced FTL system has a fundamental flaw? One that becomes obvious if you think about it, primitively." The chief engineer was frantically analyzing the shutdown sequence. His hands froze as he realized what the humans had done. They hadn't hacked the gates. They'd discovered a basic physical principle that the Council had overlooked for millennia. "Your gates work on the principle of quantum entanglement," Admiral James explained. "Very advanced, very elegant, but you never considered what would happen if someone introduced a simple electromagnetic pulse at exactly the right frequency. Something so primitive that your security systems weren't even designed to detect it." Lord Bright gripped his podium as the implications hit him. The humans hadn't needed to breach their advanced cyber defenses. They'd simply thrown a technological rock into the Council's sophisticated machinery. "We've spent 5 years mapping every gate in your network," the Admiral continued, "calculating the exact frequency needed for each one. Your sensors ignored our probes because they were too simple to register as threats. Right now, every gate in Council space is receiving a targeted pulse that disrupts its quantum field." In the command center, repair crews were already being dispatched. But the chief engineer knew it was hopeless. They would have to physically visit each gate to restart it. The Council's emergency protocols hadn't planned for such a primitive form of attack. "Consider this a demonstration," Admiral James said. "A preview of what happens when you underestimate primitive humans. The gates will restart in exactly 24 hours. Use this time to reconsider Earth's status in the galaxy." The transmission ended, leaving the Council in chaos. Member races were already demanding emergency sessions. Trade agreements were collapsing by the minute, and Lord Bright stood in his darkened chamber, realizing that humanity's revenge had only begun. High Speaker, his assistant, approached cautiously. "We're receiving reports. Some of the smaller races are already reaching out to Earth for private negotiations." Lord Bright didn't respond. He was remembering the humans' faces when he had mocked their technology. They hadn't shown anger or shame. They had simply watched, learned, and planned. For the first time in his long life, the High Speaker felt something he had never expected to feel toward a primitive race. 2 days after the jump gate shutdown, the Council's emergency session was interrupted by another crisis. The galaxy's economic markets were showing impossible patterns. High Speaker, a financial advisor, rushed into Lord Bright's private chamber. "We've detected massive trading anomalies across the outer sectors. The data streams showed something that should have been impossible. Worlds that had been economic backwaters for centuries were suddenly showing signs of advanced trade networks. Resources were flowing through routes that didn't exist on any council map." Ambassador Thomas chose this moment to make her return to the council chamber. Unlike her last visit, she didn't wait for permission to speak. "Wondering how your quarantined worlds are suddenly trading without your jump gates?" she asked, her voice carrying across the chamber. "Perhaps I can explain." The chamber's holographic display activated, showing a network of worlds that the council had long ignored. Each one glowed with economic activity. "While you were busy guarding your jump gates," Thomas continued, "Earth was teaching other primitive races about something we mastered centuries ago: sailing ships." Lord Bright's assistant whispered in his ear, explaining the concept. The High Speaker's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. "You mean you're moving goods through normal space? Without FTL? That would take years." "It would," Thomas smiled, "if we were using standard drives. But it turns out when you combine old-fashioned rocket science with pieces of your technology, you get something interesting." The display zoomed in on a cargo ship. It looked crude by council standards, but it was moving at speeds that should have been impossible for its design. "We call it the hybrid fleet," Thomas explained. "Too primitive for your sensors to identify as advanced technology, too advanced for you to track as primitive ships. We've spent 5 years building a whole new trading network while your observers dismissed us as harmless." The financial advisor was frantically updating his projections. "High Speaker, at current rates, we'll lose control of 30% of galactic trade within a month." "But that's not the interesting part," Thomas continued. "The interesting part is what we're trading." She waved her hand, and the display changed to show manufacturing facilities on various worlds. Places the council had written off as too primitive to matter were producing advanced technology, but not in the council's approved way. Turns out when you tell a bunch of primitive races they're not allowed to advance, they get creative. Every world you rejected had unique ideas, different approaches. We just helped them connect and collaborate. Lord Bright stood up sharply. "You're violating dozens of technological development protocols." "No," Thomas corrected him. "We're ignoring them, just like you ignored us. And here's the best part. Your own laws prevent you from stopping us." She brought up the Council's ancient charter, highlighting a specific clause. "According to your own rules, quarantined worlds can't be invaded or attacked unless they pose a direct military threat. Economic competition isn't grounds for intervention. You wrote that law to protect yourselves from primitive worlds, and now it protects us from you." The council chamber erupted in chaos as members realized the trap. They had spent millennia building a system designed to keep primitive races from advancing, but they had never considered that these races might simply build their own system. "Earth isn't trying to join your council anymore," Thomas announced over the noise. "We're building something better, something that doesn't judge worlds by their age or their adherence to your traditions." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Lord Bright, remember how you laughed at our primitive projectile weapons? You might want to take a closer look at what our trading ships are carrying, just in case." As she walked out, the financial advisor's projections kept getting worse. The council's economic monopoly wasn't just being challenged, It was being systematically dismantled by the very races they had dismissed as unworthy. And this was still just the beginning of Earth's revenge. The Council's war fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of a trading route they had identified. 50 ships, the pride of their navy, ready to shut down this upstart human operation once and for all. Lord Bright had finally convinced the Council that these primitive humans posed too great a threat to ignore. Target acquired, the fleet commander announced. One Earth cargo vessel, designation Montana. No escort ships detected. Weapons ready. On his command bridge, Lord Bright allowed himself a small smile. Send them our demands for immediate surrender. The response came back instantly. No. Lord Bright blinked all 4 eyes in surprise. They do realize we have 50 warships against their one cargo vessel. Incoming transmission. An officer called out. The screen lit up to show Admiral James, sitting calmly in what appeared to be a cargo hold. Metal containers lined the walls behind him. Lord Bright, James nodded. I was wondering when you'd try this. Tell me, did you ever wonder why our trading ships have such thick hulls? Before Lord Bright could respond, the cargo ship's hull began to change. Panels shifted, revealing weapon ports that no civilian vessel should have. But these weren't energy weapons like the Council used. They were simple tubes, almost primitive in design. Railguns, Admiral James explained. Primitive projectile weapons, remember. Your sensors don't even register them as weapons because they're too simple. Just like they don't register our cargo containers as missile silos. The containers behind him split open, revealing rows of missiles that combined Earth's crude rocket technology with reversed-engineered alien tech. Open fire, Lord Bright ordered, but it was too late. The Montana fired. Simple metal slugs, accelerated to impossible speeds by human ingenuity and alien power sources, tore through the Council ship's energy shields as if they weren't there. The shields were designed to stop energy weapons, not solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Launch defensive fighters. The fleet commander shouted. Small fighter craft poured from the Council ships, their elegant designs beautiful against the stars. They fired energy beams at the Montana, only to watch them bounce off shields that shouldn't have existed on a primitive vessel. Interesting thing about your shield technology, Admiral James commented as his ship continued firing. It's very advanced, very sophisticated. But it has a simple flaw. It can't handle multiple types of attacks simultaneously. The Montana's missiles launched. Each one split into dozens of smaller projectiles. Some were simple metal slugs, others carried electromagnetic pulses, and still others contained energy weapons. The Council fighters couldn't adapt their shields fast enough to stop all 3 types. Humanity's greatest strength, James continued, isn't our technology. It's our ability to use every tool available, no matter how primitive or advanced. We don't discard old weapons just because we have new ones. The Council fleet was in chaos. Their ships had never been designed to face an enemy that used such a mix of technologies. Their sophisticated targeting systems couldn't lock onto vessels using such primitive propulsion methods. Their shields couldn't defend against weapons their sensors barely registered. You know what else is interesting? James asked as his ship effortlessly dodged the Council's return fire. This isn't even a warship. It's exactly what it looks like. A cargo ship. We just made sure all our cargo vessels could defend themselves. Want to guess what our actual warships look like? As if on cue, space itself seemed to ripple. 10 Earth battleships emerged from stealth, their blocky shapes a stark contrast to the Council's sleek designs. They had been there the whole time, hidden by technology that combined primitive radar stealth with advanced quantum cloaking. The Montana is just one cargo ship, James said. We have thousands. And now you know why we've been so confident about our trading routes. Lord Bright watched in horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled by weapons that his most advanced sensors still insisted didn't exist. The humans hadn't just learned from alien technology. They had improved it by thinking primitively. And now the galaxy's most advanced civilization was learning a painful lesson about underestimating the basics of warfare. The council chamber had never been so quiet. Where once thousands of floating lights had shown member worlds pride and power, now barely half remained lit. The others had gone dark as world after world withdrew from the council. Lord Bright stood at his podium, watching his life's work crumble. The latest defection hurt the most. The Stellar Empire, one of the council's founding members, had just announced its withdrawal. The humans have shown us a better way. The Stellar Emperor's message played across the chamber. Their alliance of free worlds welcomes all species, judges them by their actions rather than their age, and encourages innovation rather than forcing conformity. Ambassador Thomas sat in the gallery, no longer a supplicant but an observer. The humans had been invited to witness the council's emergency session. Their revenge wasn't just working, it was exceeding all expectations. "We must take military action," one council member shouted, "before more worlds defect." "With what ships?" another countered. "Half our fleet was destroyed by one human cargo vessel. Our remaining ship's crews are refusing to engage Earth vessels." A third member stood up. "Then we must adapt. Copy their hybrid technology." "We can't," the chief engineer interrupted. "Our scientists are too specialized. We've spent millennia perfecting single paths of technology. The human's approach of combining different technologies requires creativity." Ambassador Thomas finished for him. "The willingness to try new things, to fail, to learn from those failures. All those primitive traits you mocked us for." The chamber erupted in arguments. Some members wanted to surrender to Earth's terms immediately. Others called for a fight to the death. A few simply sat in shocked silence, still unable to believe how quickly their power had vanished. "Order!" Lord Bright shouted, but his voice carried none of its former authority. "I have a message from Admiral James," Thomas announced, standing up. The chamber fell silent. Everyone had seen the recordings of what happened to the Council's fleet. She activated a holographic display, showing the growing network of Earth's alliance. Hundreds of worlds glowed bright, including many former Council members. "Earth offers you a choice," she said. "You can join our alliance as equals, sharing in our combined knowledge and trade. Or you can keep your pride and watch as your civilization becomes a forgotten footnote in galactic history." "You would accept us?" the chief engineer asked. "After everything?" "Unlike you," Thomas replied, "we don't judge societies by their past mistakes. We look at their potential for growth." One by one, council members began to speak. Most were ready to negotiate terms with Earth. Some remained obstinate, clinging to their belief in their superiority. Those few found themselves increasingly isolated as their allies chose survival over pride. Lord Bright watched it all with a mix of horror and fascination. The humans hadn't just beaten the Council, they had offered the galaxy a completely different way of thinking. "We have received another report," his assistant whispered. 3 more member worlds have announced their withdrawal. They're citing Earth's education programs as the reason. Education programs. The humans have been offering free technological training to any world that wants it, teaching them how to combine technologies in new ways. They're calling it the Renaissance Initiative. Lord Bright finally understood. Earth's revenge wasn't just about punishing the Council. They were reshaping the entire galaxy's way of thinking about progress and civilization. As he watched more lights go dark in his chamber, he realized that humanity had achieved something far greater than mere victory. They had proven that being primitive didn't mean being simple. It meant being adaptable, creative, and unafraid to challenge established wisdom. The age of the Council was ending. The age of human innovation was about to begin. 1 year after Earth began its revenge, the galaxy gathered for a historic moment. The great hall that had once housed the Galactic Council now served a different purpose. Its marble floors still reflected the stars above, but the floating lights had changed. Now they showed worlds of all technological levels, each one glowing with equal brightness. Lord Bright stood alone at the center of the chamber. Gone were his elaborate robes of office. Gone was his proud stance. His 4 eyes focused on the ground as Admiral James and Ambassador Thomas approached. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked. The former High Speaker nodded. It was time for the formal dissolution of the old council and the establishment of the new Galactic Alliance. And as the former leader, he had one final duty to perform. The chamber was packed. Representatives from over 1,000 worlds watched, some in person, others through holographic projections. Former council members stood alongside races they had once dismissed as primitive. Earth had kept its promise about treating all worlds equally. Admiral James stepped forward first. 1 year ago, we were called primitive. We were locked away and told to wait 50,000 years to evolve. Today, we prove that evolution comes not from age, but from willingness to learn and change. The Admiral gestured to the displayed statistics showing the galaxy's progress over the past year. Trade had increased by 300%. Technological breakthroughs were happening weekly as worlds shared their unique approaches. The hybrid ships developed by Earth were now being improved upon by dozens of species, each adding their own innovations. The old council believed in perfection through purity, Thomas added, keeping technologies separate, races divided by their advancement level. Earth showed the galaxy a different path: progress through combination, innovation through cooperation. Lord Bright finally raised his eyes to address the gathered species. His voice, once so commanding, now carried the weight of hard-learned wisdom. As the last High Speaker of the Galactic Council, he began, "I hereby formally acknowledge our failures. We became so focused on advancement that we forgot how to progress. We became so certain of our superiority that we forgot how to learn." The chamber was silent as he continued. "To Earth, and to all the races we dismissed as primitive, I offer my personal apology. You did not overcome us through violence or cunning alone. You showed us a better way to exist among the stars." Admiral James stepped forward, offering Lord Bright a data tablet. "The new constitution of the Galactic Alliance. Every member world has contributed to its creation. Will you be the first to sign?" The former High Speaker took the tablet. His hands trembled slightly as he read the first line. "All sapient species, regardless of their technological development, have equal rights to explore, trade, and advance at their own pace." He signed. Cheers erupted throughout the chamber. One by one, representatives from every world came forward to add their signatures. Former council members signed alongside races they had once quarantined. Earth's revenge had not just destroyed the old order, it had built something better in its place. "There's one more thing," Thomas announced as the signing concluded. She turned to Lord Bright. "Earth would like to offer you a position." His 4 eyes blinked in surprise. "What position could you possibly offer me?" "Teacher," she replied. "At our new Galactic University, we want you to teach advanced races how to look at technology with fresh eyes. Who better than someone who has learned this lesson firsthand?" Lord Bright felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: hope. I would be honored." As the ceremony concluded, Admiral James looked out at the gathered species. Earth's revenge was complete, but not in the way anyone had expected. They hadn't just defeated the council, they had transformed it, changed its arrogance into wisdom, its restrictions into opportunities. Humanity had proven itself to be far more than primitive. They had proven themselves to be teachers, innovators, and unifiers. And the galaxy would never be the same.